Hi, I'm Andrew Cain, State Politics Editor of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and with me is my colleague, politics reporter Dave Ress. And we're here to talk about Labor Day, the traditional kickoff of the sprint toward Election Day. Dave, Labor Day brings us two rites of political passage in Virginia. Why don't you tell folks about those?
There's the Buena Vista Parade down Magnolia Street in that little town in the valley. Used to cover that when I was working out there. And then that's in recent years become more and more of a Republican tinted gathering. And then Bobby Scott, the congressman from Newport News, always has a big Labor Day picnic on the shores of the Hampton Roads by the water there. Usually brings Democrats from all over the state to that one. So
Now, early voting commences on September 20, so it's not really a 65 or so day sprint to election. It's going to be condensed, but one of the questions that is on a lot of folks' mind is whether Virginia is truly in play. Of course, Democrats have carried Virginia's electoral votes for the past 4 presidential elections, but we've seen some signs that neither side is taking Virginia for granted. We've got, as we tape this on Friday, Gwen Walz, who is the wife of Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz, is in Manassas for a teacher appreciation event. And we could have an interesting guest at Congressman Scott's picnic.
Yep. The second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, is headed down to Newport News for where the only thing really going on Labor Day is the picnic. So that's probably an interesting sign. I think on the other side, they're planning caravans and office openings. You know, one of the interesting things that I think means the rituals that we see on Labor Day are becoming more and more ritual was a conversation I had with Tim Kaine opening up an office in Stanton, Virginia, which is not really very heavily Democratic turf. But what he was saying is he was trying to get people to sign up for door knocking beginning in July. And what he was saying is that these days the campaign is starting earlier and earlier. And some of that is a sense that although Virginia has swung Democratic in the last several presidential elections and in statewide elections, nobody's taking anything for granted this time around.
Of course, it swung back at the state level in 2021 when Governor Youngkin led a sweep. The 3 who won were the first Republicans to win statewide since 2009. So we do see signs that both parties are fighting for Virginia. Former President Trump stopped in to a Vietnamese restaurant at the Eden Center in Falls Church on Monday with Hung Cao, the Republican U.S. Senate nominee. So both parties are at least acting as if they're playing for Virginia. So the question is whether this is real or whether this is sort of a feint.
I think it's a little bit hard, a little bit hard to tell. I mean, the polls that we've seen say we're very close and within the margin of error. The polls have some interesting quirks to them. Perhaps the latest, Roanoke College, interestingly had a really large, I think about 13% of voters surveyed saying we want to go third party, which is a percentage that we just don't see in American elections. So polling gets kind of interesting because it's sort of how you feel at the moment when the crunch time comes and it's time to, fill in the bubble or flip the lever. People sometimes react quite differently.
And we've seen some shaking out a little bit about who's going to be on the ballot in Virginia. 5 candidates have qualified so far, I believe, with Jill Stein. But some news on a couple of the other aspirants. Robert Kennedy Jr., who dropped out and endorsed Trump, will still be on the ballot in Virginia. And Cornel West, an academic sort of on the left side of the political spectrum, will not qualify for the ballot. So if Virginia is as close as the polls show, there could be some marginal impact here.
Yeah, I think there could be. Of course, the other thing that could be going on too is that you're a Democrat and say, I'm very worried, it's really close, are you signaling to the Republicans it's time to invest more here, and therefore invest less in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona that we've been thinking of as the battleground states?
And North Carolina
And North
and Georgia
Carolina.
could be battleground states as well.
Right. I think some of the latest, I don't know sometimes how seriously to take some of the pundits and their calls, but I think one of the latest calls is North Carolina is now a toss-up. We'll see.
Yeah, and North Carolina traditionally is a Republican state. I think President Obama carried it once, but it's reverted in recent elections. So we'll see whether it's truly in play or whether it reverts to the Republicans. But one of the things that the Republicans have been telling us is they're not just doing this for show, that they are opening offices around the state and that they are paying for staffing that they didn't do at the same level in 2020. We know that Trump has come here a couple of times. You attended a rally that he did down in Chesapeake. So at least for the time being, it looks like this could be a fight in Virginia.
Yep. Well, it's one of those cases. It's one of those cases, as with every election, where you got to get out and vote if you want your guy to win. And even in Virginia, that's going to be true this year.
With the change at the top of the Democratic ticket, with Vice President Harris becoming the Democratic nominee, they've talked about new enthusiasm they had there. And it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out in our key congressional contests. One of them that's really close is the one that you're familiar with down in Hampton Roads.
Yep. That's one where the second district, which is anchored in Virginia Beach, has gone back and forth a couple of times in the last few cycles. Jen Kiggins is the first-term Republican who defeated two-term Democrat Elaine Luria. That was an interesting race in 2020 because Luria had, as a very junior member of Congress, had a very prominent role on the January 6th special committee. It is a district that got redistricted in time for that election and got somewhat more Republican. But it's also a district that is not in. There's been a tendency in recent years to sort of think of the Beach and Chesapeake, which are the two big municipalities there, as being very, very Republican. And I think Luria's elections and some of what we've seen in the state Senate and House races have said, don't necessarily count on that. They're more in play, and in play in the kind of the interesting ways for national politics that suburban districts where perhaps they're very military dependent too, but they're very suburban, and that's kind of what's at play nationally in this election.
So there's going to be a lot for us to report on and a lot to follow in the days ahead. So I want to thank Dave Rest, my colleague, for joining me, and we invite all of you to continue to follow our coverage on richmond.com and in the Richmond Times-Dispatch.